One of the crowning achievements of modern human civilization is its ability to mask our vulnerabilities and hide certain inner truths from us. Because what modern civilization does and has done throughout the 20th century, and to a far greater extent now, is it provides a new environment that reshuffles our mentality, our evolved psychology, and as a consequence, our perceptual apparatus. And so some simple examples of this would be the idea that it is absolutely imperative that you make sure you get access to some sort of food and acquire nutrients, because that is infinitely easier than it was a few thousand years ago, when you actually had to work for your food, expend energy, labor. Sure, you need to walk to the supermarket or drive, alternatively if you're an American, but at the end of the day, it's not that much energy expenditure, and as long as you can afford it, you can get what you want. Another example of civilization masking certain vulnerabilities would be a broken arm, or even worse, a broken leg. In an ancestral environment, were you to break your arm, it would be very, very serious. A broken leg possibly could kill you, not directly, but you wouldn't be fit anymore. You couldn't execute the tasks that you have to in order to survive. Hunt, gather, build shelter, all these things. You'd be slow. You might be left high and dry, and so you might starve to death or be killed by a predator, etc. And these are rather obvious examples. These are physical examples. But one thing civilization also has done is it masks some of our evolved weaknesses in terms of our psychological and mental traits. And one of the things that it has done as a consequence is it has distorted our perception of the nature of the male-female relationship. Now, of course, I've talked about this for years, but I'd like to talk about some specifics today, and more specifically about the differences in men's perceptual apparatus versus women's. So, as we grow up, we're exposed to tall tales, fairy tales, if you will, about ourselves and the opposite sex. Some of you, if you're old enough, might remember something along the lines of, girls are sugar and spice and all things nice. Or, that's all you need to do is be yourself. Be a nice person. Be a good person. And that's sufficient. And many of us who grew up with these notions quickly learned to disabuse ourselves of them, even without the internet, because we learned that those claims, if claims they are, didn't map onto reality, at least not the reality we were experiencing. And with the emergence of the internet, we became even more aware of it, because we got confirmation from other men. And this exposure to things as they are actually happening is what allows you to bypass the civilizational blockade. And a lot of this stuff, you could argue, is well-intentioned. Tell people that human beings operate in a certain way, even if they don't, because it's good for them to believe that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really help you. It doesn't help you with the reality on the ground, and so it's best to jettison that. And so men learn that. Men learn that the thing that's most valuable about you as a man is your status, the money you make, the things you can acquire. And later, you'll learn through research that in general, as a human being, your appearance is incredibly important. And these two things combined, your appearance and your money/status, those are the most important factors involved in your acquisition of a mate or a female partner, however you want to put it. Of course, your height is part of your general looks. That's also very important. And so men learn that rather quickly in the hyper-digitalized world we live in, where everything is linked via the internet. You experience these things rather quickly. You know that when people tell you that girls are sugar and spice and all things nice, that's poppycock. And you also learn empirically, by way of experience and living life, that nothing is going to be given to you, and that some things just aren't going to work out. For example, looking at the risks involved in marriage, the statistics. So you learn all these things, and you have to make judgments and assessments about these situations in concert with reality as it is. You can't, as a man, afford to ignore reality. So, in many cases, men will have to just say, nope, I'm not getting married. And in even more severe cases, due to a lack of looks and status, many men will have to resign themselves to never having access to females. And that's just a coming to terms with reality. It's something that civilization tries to mask, but the way human beings operate, we haven't changed that much in tens of thousands of years. And so in many ways, the modern man, is sort of a scientist of sorts. He has to experiment, and he has to learn by trial and error, oftentimes trial by fire in a certain sense, that some things work and other things don't. And that in general is a very scientific perspective. But if we contrast that with a female perspective, women are also fed fairy tales about Prince Charmings and magical weddings and all these sorts of things. But there's a primary difference. For various reasons we could speculate as to why, women tend to continue to cling to a lot of the fantastical thinking they were indoctrinated with and grew up with throughout their lives. And probably the most important driving force here is the fact that people tend to be nice to women, they tend to sugarcoat things with them, and so they don't need to learn necessarily from the hard knocks of life, at least not at the same rate that men do. And so women in general are much worse at assessing their own reality with respect to the dating market. They don't know how to assess their looks particularly well. They tend to exaggerate and engage in hyperbole. And when things fail, they almost never look at the underlying conditions for that and simply attribute it to mismatching or the blame game. And I want to bring up a specific set of examples here. Many of you might be familiar with a gentleman by the name of Kevin Samuels, who has burst onto the scene in recent months. And he's a very popular format. Of course, it's partly a business format, but a lot of the conversations he has are with women. And you could say he speaks truth to power. He is very, very much unadulterated in the truth-telling business when it comes to the dating and mating game. He's able to get away with it in a way that many people couldn't for a number of reasons. He's wealthy, successful, tall, and probably most importantly, is a person of color. And that gives you a certain level of coverage that other people might not have in that respect. And so he'll have women call up, and you can learn firsthand about the world, this fantasy world they live in. They'll call up, they'll be in their 40s, they have 3 children already by 3 different fathers, and they still think that they have reasonable options out there, or that their desires and wishes are reasonable. And sometimes Kevin Samuels will break it down in very numerical ways. He'll talk about the total percentage of men earning, say, over $300,000 a year, or something like that. And when he brings that to the fore, the women still don't get it. He talks about millions and millions of women wanting a fraction of the population that's somewhere above 3%. And they still don't get it. And in many cases, these women have been through multiple relationships, marriages. They've had multiple children by multiple fathers. And he lays the numbers out on the table, and they still don't get it. And this is why I like to use this analogy of scientists and sorceresses. Because if you believe in magic, which is effectively what a lot of these women believe in, you'll be more inclined to believe some of this stuff. You'll be more inclined to think, okay, it didn't work out now, but maybe it'll work at 35 or 45. Maybe the chances are infinite. And this is the problem fundamentally. And I think Kevin Samuels, if you haven't checked him out, I'd recommend it to get a sense of the kinds of people he engages with and the way he talks to them. Women throughout their youth benefit from their looks, their prime. Probably the best position to be in for anybody, if possible, is to be a young, attractive woman. And they somehow imagine that lasts forever because they get used to a certain standard, between 18 and 25, say. And after a certain number of carnal experiences, they realize that maybe there's something else, and so they look for something more long-term. And they go from boy toys, effectively, to expectations that are stratospheric, such as every man has to be at least 6'2", earn 6 figures, be a monster in bed, have junk the size of an elephant's junk, and so on. And so the idea is you move from the fun you had to perfection, as if any man were to embody that. And one of the things I like about Kevin Samuels is he turns the tables, or rather he reverses the mirror, and he says, what about you? You're average at best. So what about you in your glorious fiveness at age 35, best case scenario? What about you demands of a man that he be way beyond that. And in this way, he turns the tables. And it just shows you, frankly speaking, the level of delusion in these women, but more broadly, modern women. And this is part and parcel of the problem of civilization, because civilization masks our vulnerabilities, but also masks the underlying reality of our own psychology. And they cling to a kind of magical thinking, frankly speaking. How else could a woman at age 44 with 4 different children by 4 different fathers, who is very, very overweight to obese, think she could still have reasonable chances? Stratospheric expectations, in fact. Well, you only get that way by dabbling in sorcery, your own illusions that you weave around yourself in your own life. And this is one of the fundamental differences, and will persist in being one of the fundamental differences between men and women. Men get taught by reality, the way reality is, and the way we exist in reality, because nobody comes over to comfort us when things don't work out, when the disappointments occur. You live and learn, you try to learn from these things, and you move on. And we can also accept things that are not possible versus things that are possible. But because of the way our society has persisted in recent decades in particular, women move from a fantasy world to another fantasy world, end up persisting in this fantasy world seemingly forever. And I don't think this is going to change. The internet, for example, with things like Tinder and the manosphere and the so-called red pill, this has not been a clarion call, a wake-up call for men. But the opposite, oddly enough, or not so oddly enough, has happened for women at all. In fact, women are as clueless about the underlying reality of the mating and dating game as they have been for decades. The internet has not had an effect. Sure, they've learned ways of making money with things like OnlyFans and getting on Twitch. Sure. But they don't understand that their expectations and their perceptions of reality do not align with reality as it actually is. And whether or not this ends up making them miserable, who knows? That's for other people to judge. But it's one of the fundamental persistent differences that, despite all the illusions, the mirages that modern civilization created, that divide men and women. Anyway, thank you for tuning in. And please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share the video, hit the bell icon to be informed of forthcoming videos. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. May the gods watch over you. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.